All right, welcome to part two of this seven-part series on the agreement of sale. This week we are going to go through pages 3 and 4. Hopefully you received the notes and hopefully you're able to see my shared screen right now, which at the top right now starts with page 3. So page 3 starts off with number 6 paragraph. And what that states is the zoning of the property. So in the yellow, I have highlighted failure of this agreement to contain the zoning classification will render this agreement voidable at buyer's option. And if voidable, if voided, any deposits tendered by the buyer will be returned to the buyer without any requirement for court action. So what I didn't highlight is that little in parentheses, except in cases where the property and each parcel thereof, if subdividable, is zoned solely or primarily to permit single-family dwellings residential. Okay. So if you sell a house and your buyer's going to move into it, and it's actually zoned, let's just say mixed use village, or something like that, according to the borough or township, and you don't put the specific classification on that line, the buyer could back out the deal and get their deposit money back. So who's this most important to make sure that it's right? Probably the listing agent and the seller, right? Right. So let's make sure that that's in there. Don't just assume, especially if it's not in a neighborhood. If it's on a main road, you may want to look it up and just look at the ordinance map, zoning map, and make sure that you have the designation in there, because again, it could be a way for a very savvy buyer to get out of the contract. Okay. I wrote in there, just look at tax record or township municipal website. Okay. Any questions on that section? Okay. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I often see that thing blank so many times, and it should not be blank. Paragraph 7 talks about fixtures and personal property. I can tell you that once or twice a year, Tim and I, we have a dispute that we have to deal with in regards to an item that sometimes is already listed in here, and sometimes it's not listed in there, and you have to be very specific. Don't assume. Okay. So what it says here is part A. It is possible for certain items of personal property to be so integrated into the property that they become fixtures and will be regarded as part of the property and therefore included in the sale. Buyer and seller are encouraged to be specific when negotiating. So what that's saying is just don't assume. Okay, be specific. That's kind of their little cover for the rest of these 3 items that may or may not stay. Okay. Section B is what is included. So these are pre-written items that are included in the sale of real estate. Okay. So if you are on a listing appointment, you should know these items. I know you're jumping the boat with talking about agreeing a sale before you even get in the listing contract, but you should know these items so that when you are walking through with the seller or even part of your marketing package, maybe type out these items and say, these are the items that are in the contract that are staying. Okay. If you want any of these items excluded, please let me know now before we make the property active and start advertising it. So included items, and I'll go over it real quick here, that are free of liens, are plumbing, heating, gas fireplace logs, radiator covers, hardwired security systems, thermostats, lighting fixtures that include chandeliers and ceiling fans, pools, spas, and hot tubs, including covers and cleaning equipment, electric animal fencing systems, but not the collars. Okay, the collars can stay with the owner. The system has to stay. Garage door openers and transmitters, mounting brackets and hardware for TV and sound equipment. Not the TV and sound equipment, but the hardware for it that has been screwed into the walls, integrated. Unpotted shrubbery, so anything in a pot can be moved, so they are excluded. I'm sorry, they are included, unpotted, meaning it's not in a pot, it's planted in the ground. Plantings and trees, smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, sump pumps, storage sheds. That's an item that's already pre-written in there. Fences, mailboxes, wall-to-wall carpeting. Okay, so area rugs, they can go. Wall-to-wall carpet has to stay. Existing window screens, storm windows, and screen/storm doors, window covering hardware, including rods and brackets, shades and blinds, awnings, central vac system with attachments, built-in air conditioners, built-in appliances, the range/oven, dishwashers, trash compactors, any remaining heat and cooking fuel stored on the property at the time of settlement. So if you own your own oil tank, okay, and there's half a tank left, the seller has to leave that. They can't pump it out and take it with them, okay? If it's leased, then we go down to part C, okay? The following items are not owned by the seller and may be subject to a lease or other financing agreement. Contact a provider or vendor for more info. Examples they give: solar panels, windmills, water treatment systems, propane tanks, and satellite dishes. So again, be specific. Part of the listing contract is it's in there what items are leased and what's not staying. So, okay. Part D talks about the excluded fixtures and items. So that's where you can type in what's excluded. And usually in Bright, a lot of agents now are very specific with what's included and what's not, what's excluded. So just take a look at that and make sure you know what stays and what goes before you execute a contract. Okay? Yes.
This is Sue. Can I ask a quick question about that? What about like something like a Nest thermostat or a doorbell?
Sure. That's been a hot topic. And again, if you're not sure, be specific and just type it in. I would ask the listing agent beforehand. Now, under the items that are included, you know, one could say that, you know, those things are screwed in or hardwired in. I think where's the alarm system? Could say about alarm system. So again, if your seller wants to take it, be very specific with that.
What if you have the buyer, they saw it, it was there up until the walkthrough and it's gone? I'm talking about the doorbell.
Right. Again, that's a very hot topic. You know, that's something that one party could argue that it should stay and one party could argue that it shouldn't stay. I don't know. Does anybody have a correct answer for that, Tim?
So I'm sorry, was it it was one of those Ring doorbells?
Yeah, like a Nest.
Yeah, I had that happen. And unfortunately, and I was the buyer, the buyer's agent, and we went in and they had them installed on the front and the back of the house.
Mm-hmm.
It was our mistake. We assumed they were part of it because it's technically considered a fixture. But what the seller ended up doing was installing a regular doorbell. So we didn't, but I didn't write it on the contract that the Ring doorbell stays.
Right.
Because we assumed it would stay since it was affixed to the house.
Right.
But it was not, and we lost that fight.
It's a hardwired security system.
Yep. because they replaced it with a functioning doorbell, that we were not able to keep because we didn't write it specifically that it was included, that specific was included in the deal.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a leg to stand on.
Right. But again,
Even with a security system, I write it in that the security, like if there is a separate security system like Comcast or whatever, I usually will write that in that the security system stays so that
Right.
my people don't have to buy the new equipment. But I totally missed the Ring doorbell feature.
Mm-hmm.
I just wasn't even thinking that would be gone.
And after this meeting, I'm going to read up on the listing contract again, just to see, because they did add something about the Internet of Things too. So let me read about that and I'll get back to you on that. Okay, Sue?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so we enter paragraph 8, which now talks about the mortgage contingency. So, you know, it seems like this is one of the most common things that buyers use to back out and get their deposit money back, which brings me to one point to just let you think about. In this entire contract, is there anywhere in this entire contract that says if the buyer doesn't do this, the seller gets a deposit money? Specifically says the seller gets the deposit money? It doesn't, right? Because it's always kind of like that gray area, and you really have to talk through it and figure things out. There are several areas in here where it says the buyer gets their deposit money back, but never says specifically that the seller gets their deposit. Okay. It talks about buyer being in default later on, but it doesn't say that the buyer's in default, the seller gets deposit money. Okay. So paragraph 8 starts off with the mortgage contingency. And you have 2 boxes to elect. You can waive, and if you waive, everything thereafter doesn't matter. Okay. So waived, this sale is not contingent on mortgage financing, although buyer may obtain mortgage financing and or the parties may include an appraisal contingency. So just because somebody check marks that and you're the listing agent and you tell your seller, this is a cash deal, that's not accurate. They can still get financing if they want. It's just not contingent on it. If they can't come up to the settlement table without the money, they are in default. Okay. The second choice is elected. So they can elect to have a mortgage contingency, and then everything thereafter, Part A, this sale is contingent upon buyer obtaining mortgage financing according to the following terms. So you have these 2 boxes for a first mortgage on the property and a second mortgage on the property. Okay. And these are basically the rules you go by for the mortgage contingency. The first thing is the loan amount. Okay. What's the loan amount that we're following for this mortgage contingency? How much is the buyer borrowing to buy this house? Okay. What are the terms? How many years? Type of mortgage. Is it conventional 5%, conventional 20%, FHA, VA, PHFA, USDA? What kind of loan are we talking about here? Okay. The next line states for conventional loans, okay? Not FHA, not VA, not USDA, but for conventional loans, the loan to value ratio is not to exceed blank percent. Okay. So I did a little worksheet, and I'm going to scroll down to it right now, called loan to value percent. Okay. So the loan is the amount bank is allowing you to borrow. The value is the appraised value. Loan to value is the amount bank is allowing you to borrow versus the appraised value. So it's a percentage, okay? So let's say you have a $200,000 purchase price, okay? And you have a 20% conventional. So you need 20% down. That's $40,000 the buyer will need to bring. The loan amount is 160,000, right? So 160 plus 40 equals 200. The loan amount is 80%. Buyer will borrow. So 80% is the loan to value. And it's equivalent to saying $160,000 loan amount to $200,000 purchase price. Okay. So what happens if this $200,000 home only appraises at 190? Okay. Here's what happens. You get a $190,000 appraisal value. You still need 20% of that 190, and that is $38,000 the buyer will need to bring. The loan amount now went from 160 down to 152. That's the maximum the bank is willing to allow you to borrow on this deal. Okay. So now the buyer will need to bring an additional $10,000. Okay. So not only do they need to bring 38,000, but they need to bring $10,000, which is 48 grand. So I have down there $38,000 plus 152,000 plus 10,000, that's 200,000. So if you want to look at it versus the original sales price, okay, not the appraisal, but the original sales price, if you get a loan amount of 152 and the original purchase price was 200 grand, your loan to value is down to like 76% now. This is why this is the built-in appraisal contingency, okay? Because now, instead of being able to borrow 160,000 like you originally thought and filled in, you're only allowed to borrow 152, and you got to come up with the rest. And that's not what the mortgage contingency says. Mortgage contingency, when you wrote it, originally said, I need to borrow 160, but now the bank's only giving you 152. Okay. So when you hear of agents saying, well, there's a built-in appraisal contingency in the mortgage contingency, if you fill it out right, that's what they're talking about.
Kong, it's Tara. I have a question.
Yeah, Tara.
I'm dealing right now with a property where there is a primary offer on the property, and we had a backup offer on it. They wanted to have something there in case this fell apart because it was already under contract.
Sure.
The house did not appraise.
Okay.
And the initial buyers or FHA buyers, it was a $10,000 deficit in the appraisal, and
Okay.
the FHA buyers don't have the cash to come up with that to get to settlement.
Okay.
And the seller's not willing to negotiate on that.
Sure.
So the agent contacted me and asked, because I have a conventional buyer, 15% down, they have cash. So she said, would your buyers be willing to write in the contract that they'll pay up to $10,000 over appraised value up to their purchase price in order to get the house? Now, my buyer's okay with that, but what they may do is change their down payment. If the appraisal doesn't come in, if it comes in low again, they may change their down payment from the 15% to whatever to help with to pay out the cash for the appraisal.
Mm-hmm.
If they do that, do I need to go back into this area whenever? So like if they do, it's a $400,000 house. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
instead of 15%, they'll put 13% to have $8,000 kind of to play with.
Right.
Do I have to change this on the contract if they decide to change their down payment?
No. And the reason why, Tara, going back to the first meeting, once this contract is executed, don't change it.
Do I need to do an addendum or anything?
Well, the change in terms.
Change in terms. That's where I would do that.
Okay, so it does need to, if they're changing from 15% to 13%, I do need to get that signed off by everybody? Because I've never had to do this before.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and we're going to go into a little more of that here very shortly too.
Okay,
And it may answer your question as well.
okay, thank you.
Part B. So Part B, everybody always, I'm sorry, let's go back. The interest rate percentage, I'm sorry. In the box there, line 104, interest rate percent. However, buyer agrees to accept the interest rate as may be committed by the mortgage lender not to exceed a maximum interest rate of blank. So typically what you want to see there is a spread, okay? So you put in the interest rate there of, let's say, 3.75, because that's what it says on the pre-approval. But sellers and listing agents wants to see a spread because you're technically not locked in yet. So typically I'd like to see at least a half-point spread in there, just to be sure that, you know, if the rates go up slightly by the time they lock in their rate, we're still good to go. Okay.
It's also important on line 102 that you write that mortgage lender in,
Yeah.
that coincides with the pre-approval letter. So that if for some reason you had in there that you were getting a loan through PNC and you got a pre-approval from PNC, but then they went to Fulton and got turned down, you know,
Yeah.
is their deposit at risk or not? So you want the pre-approval letter to match the name of the broker in line 102.
Correct.
Yep.
Remember in the
Yeah.
buyer's market, we always get TBD, to be determined.
Right.
Yeah.
Not anymore. You gotta be specific because sellers and list agents want you to be very specific with who you're borrowing money from. Okay.
Con?
Yeah.
Oh, it's Paula. Speaking of the TBDs, I recently had a rash of deals where that's written in, or a lender is written in, but let's say 2 to 3 weeks before settlement, they change.
Right.
So is there any way to avoid that without saying, no, you come up with a lender, or we're going to move on to the next one?
It's hard for me to say. Again, it's entirely up to the seller. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the next section, and that may answer your question as well, Paula.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yep.
Hey, Colin.
Yes.
Hey, just real quick question. I ran into this last week, but if you're working with somebody that doesn't have perhaps the best credit on that interest rate spread section, that first block doesn't necessarily have to be the rate that's included on the pre-approval letter, as long as the spread includes the actual rate, correct? So if you want to not make it obvious that the rate is a little bit higher, you might make it a larger spread. That's what I think we're talking about.
I mentioned that too, Jim. Something with your clients, let's say right now, the best rate right now is like what, 3.875, maybe 4%. But if your client isn't as credit worthy and they're at 4.5, you may want to put in there for a spread instead of 4.5 to 5%. And then agents will see that, oh, wait a minute, why are they getting 4.5%? You might want to put in there a larger spread, say 4 to 5%. And then the list agent, if they're not savvy enough to question that, you may be able to, you know, just shove your offer in, and the list agent won't question that. Okay. But I always look at the pre-approval and see what the interest rate is on there in comparison to what's on the spread. Okay. The last lines of this box, 107 to 110, discount points, comma, loan origination, comma, loan placement, and any other fees charged by the lender as a percentage of the mortgage loan excluding mortgage insurance premiums or VA funding fee, not to exceed blank percent of the mortgage loan. Okay, so let's just talk about loan origination fee then, because that's the most common fee a lender charges. Okay, typically, what is it? $900 to $1,200 for loan origination fee. Okay, but if they charge it as a percentage, let's say they say, well, it's 0.25% of the loan amount, then we need to know that so that we can put that in. Okay, I know I've never seen that box filled in any offer I receive. And after reading this contract, maybe I should start asking the lender that. Okay, because that's definitely a way for a buyer to back out, because it says 0% if not specified. Well, what if the lender charges them 0.25 and they don't like that? They can back out. Even as small as a percentages of 0.25. It's not even a point. Okay, so just be careful. Again, talk to the lender before you finalize a deal as a list agent. Anybody have any questions on that? I caught that reading this time, and it made sense to me after I read it like 10 times.
Even if it's disclosed on the buyer's estimated closing costs, like when you put in like the funding fee and the origination fee, and they sign off that they're aware of that they, because it's not part of the contract, then they can back out.
If it comes up at any point in the deal, buyer can back out.
Okay.
Okay, especially if the lender can write a letter and says, yeah, the loan origination fee is now 0.25%.
I always use that to my benefit though, for my buyers when I'm submitting the offer.
Right.
Because I put in there the exact percent that we will agree on, so that if there's anything that changes, whether it's in their loan or anything else, I can use that as another potential out.
Correct.
Because 9 times out of 10, it's going to change.
Right. Yep.
Now, I never really looked at that, so to speak, from the listing side, but I definitely utilize that for my buyers,
right,
because I'm trying to put as many possible ways for them to get out of the deal as possible if we need it.
Yeah. So just be careful with that on what side you're on. I mean,
Yeah.
would it hurt to always have 1% in there? Probably not. Okay. Especially if you're on the list side. So part B, we are now talking about documentation demonstrating lender's approval. Okay. So nowhere in this paragraph B does it say mortgage commitment, but yet we as agents use mortgage commitment date as like, that's what this means. It doesn't. This is not mortgage commitment it's talking about. It's talking about documentation demonstrating lender's approval, whether conditional or outright, of buyer's mortgage application according to the terms set forth above in those boxes. Buyer will promptly deliver a copy of the documentation to seller, but in any case, no later than blank date. Okay. So what do we always fill in there as a buyer agent? Like a week before settlement or 2 weeks before, right? Is that what we always do? Looking at it from the list side and reading this and now seeing that it's actually documentation demonstrating lender's approval, whether conditional or outright, maybe we should have that closer to the execution date instead of the settlement date, right? Does anybody agree or disagree? Or so again, you fill in a date.
If you have it closer to the execution date, then it forces that buyer to lock in his interest rate,
right?
And in line 104 through 106.
So going to the next paragraph then, Tim, under 1, it says, if seller does not receive a copy of the documentation demonstrating lender's conditional or outright approval of buyer's mortgage application by the date indicated above, Seller may terminate this agreement by written notice to buyer. Seller's right to terminate continues until the buyer delivers documentation demonstrating lender's conditional or outright approval of buyer's mortgage application to seller. Until the seller terminates this agreement pursuant to this paragraph, buyer must continue to make good faith to obtain mortgage financing. So up to once that date comes and the buyer does not give you any kind of letter stating their approval, the seller can back out of the deal and go to the next one. Okay. Now, section 2 states seller may terminate this agreement by written notice to buyer after the date, okay, after they've received the documentation. If the documentation demonstrating lender's conditional or outright approval of buyer's mortgage application, A, does not satisfy the terms of paragraph 8A, okay. B, contains any conditions not specified in this agreement of sale, like the buyer has to sell another property, or an appraisal must be received by the lender, or the approval is not valid through the settlement date. And if these are not met, that is not satisfied and or removed in writing by the mortgage lender within 7 days after the date indicated in paragraph 8B, so whatever you filled in, or any extensions thereof, other than those conditions that are customarily satisfied at or near settlement, like obtaining insurance or confirming employment.
Kong, do you have a recommendation as far as like when you're filling in that date, what an appropriate amount of time is?
Yeah. I would talk
usually
to your
say 2
lender.
weeks before the closing date, but I didn't know if that's like normal or.
I would talk to your lender about that, Stacy, and just say, what are you comfortable with as far as giving me like some kind of outright or conditional approval? Okay.
Okay.
And some of them will say, well, I can give you one right now. I've already checked out their W-2s and taxes and everything. I can send it to you, but it'll say conditioned on an appraisal, a satisfactory appraisal. Okay. And then when you submit that, if the date's early and the seller sees it, they could terminate the agreement if it doesn't satisfy what that's in the mortgage contingency boxes. Okay. So before you send it out, just make sure you read it and see if there's anything that's not agreed upon on there.
Kong, I have a question. So
Yeah.
if we, like, I have one lender specifically where they pre-approve the clients like ahead of time, like on some type of fast track, like approval system.
Sure.
And then they will give basically a commitment letter like 7 days after we're ratified, but it does say like conditioned on the satisfactory appraisal. So you're saying that's not a good idea, that then the seller could kick them out?
I'm not saying it's not a good idea, but I'm just saying that it could be a possibility.
Why would that be a possibility though, if we have a appraisal contingency? Wouldn't that, to a listing agent, make it look like?
Again, now that you bring up an appraisal contingency in, it does state that you have X amount of days to do it, right?
So you're
Yep.
saying if you didn't have the 30-day appraisal contingency attached to your contract, and the line for line B states this date, but there is a contingency for appraisal, technically the seller could back out because that was not a contingency that they would have agreed upon.
Right.
But Morgan, if you have your appraisal contingency addendum, they cannot back out because of that contingency on your commitment letter.
Yeah, the addendum supersedes the contract.
Yeah.
But
So
what
then
if
I
it's
have a
like,
question.
go ahead, Tara.
Well, then I have a question, because on the new appraisal contingency, it says it's not utilized for what, FHA and VA? So
Correct.
we no
Yes.
longer attach the appraisal contingency for FHA and VA. And when you look at the box on the next page, it doesn't really give a time frame as to when the appraisal will be completed.
See all the things that come up? I don't have an answer for you, really. It's just, again, it could be up for debate. I mean, how badly does the seller want out of the contract? There's ways.
Hey, Carl, just not to overthink, but just another question. It says except for FHA and VA. I've been putting the loan to value percentage in regardless of the kind of loan. Does that mean you really only need to put it in for conventional? Because that's the way I would read that.
Yes, you don't need a loan to value percentage for FHA or VA because, again, later on here, we're going to go over why.
Okay. So that could be blank then.
Specifically says there on line 100 for conventional loans, comma, the loan to value is blank, blank, blank. Okay.
Yeah.
So number 3 to paragraph B. If this agreement is terminated pursuant to paragraphs 8B 1 or 2, any of the above here, or the mortgage loan is not obtained for settlement, let's go all the way down here. All deposit monies will be returned to buyer according to paragraphs 26, and this agreement will be voided. Buyer will be responsible for any costs incurred by buyer for any inspections, certifications obtained according to the terms of this agreement, and any costs incurred by buyer for 1, title search, title insurance, 2, flood insurance, insurances, fire insurance, hazard insurance, and 3, appraisal fee. Okay. So if the seller does terminate, then the buyer gets everything back as far as deposit money, minus these fees. Okay. Paragraph C talks about the loan to value, what it is. Okay. The loan to value ratio is used by lenders as one tool to help assess their potential risk of a mortgage loan. Okay. Paragraph D, the interest rates and fees provisions in paragraph 8A are satisfied if the mortgage lender gives buyer the right to guarantee the interest rate and fees at or below the maximum level stated. Okay, so again, even if you have a range of 4.5 to 5, and miraculously the rates went down to 4.5, or I'm sorry, 4%, it's below that range, so you still have to take it. Okay, it's just when it goes above 5% or whatever the maximum amount you wrote in. Here's a pre-filled one. If lenders give buyer the right to lock in the interest rates, buyer will do so at least 15 days before settlement. So where it gets screwy is if you have a very long settlement, like 90 plus days, right? Or 60 plus days, and the buyer can't really lock in yet. But if you have a deal that's 45 days, you want that to be a lot closer to the execution date than the settlement date. Okay. Meaning, as of right now, the way it's written, they have to lock in on the 30th day. You know, as a list agent, I probably want them to lock in probably right around day, the first week. Okay. D, again, we're right in the middle there, line 141. Buyer gives seller the right at seller's sole option and as permitted by law and the mortgage lenders to contribute financially without promise of reimbursement to buyer and or the mortgage lenders to make the above mortgage terms available to buyer. So stating that a seller can help contribute through seller help as long as there's no side deal that the buyer is going to pay them back at some point or have like a private loan. Okay. E, within blank day, 7 if not specified, from the execution of this agreement, buyer will make a complete mortgage application, including payment for and ordering of credit reports without delay for the mortgage term, and to the mortgage lenders identified in paragraph 8A, if any, otherwise to a responsible mortgage lender of buyer's choice. So if that's left blank, they can pretty much go anywhere they want, but they do have to still abide by the rules of this mortgage contingency that's set and all the dates and timelines. Broker for buyer, if any, otherwise broker for seller, is authorized to communicate with mortgage lender to assist the mortgage loan process. Broker for seller, if any, is permitted to contact the mortgage lender at any time to determine the status of the mortgage loan application. So there's your right to talk to the mortgage lender. Okay. F, buyer will be in default of this agreement. Again, it says buyer is in default of this agreement, but nowhere in this paragraph does it state that the seller gets a deposit money. Okay. Buyer will be in default of this agreement if buyer furnishes false information to anyone concerning buyer's financial and or employment status, fails to cooperate in good faith with processing the mortgage loan application, including payment for and ordering of appraisal without delay, fails to lock in interest rate as stated in paragraph 8D, or otherwise causes the lender to reject or refuse to approve or issue a mortgage loan commitment. Okay.
Kong, in regards to that deposit money, I know you said it a couple times as to whether the seller can keep the money. Not to jump ahead of ourselves in the contract, but on page 13 and paragraph 26, it does spell that out.
Yeah.
So they could, in that instance, keep it.
Cool.
All right.
All right. G, if the mortgage lender or a property and casualty insurer providing insurance required by the mortgage lender requires repairs to the property, buyer will, upon receiving the requirements, deliver a copy of the requirements to seller. Within blank days, 5, pre-filled, of receiving the copy of the requirements, seller will notify buyer whether seller will make the required repairs at seller's expense. So this is talking about, let's say you get an appraisal back, or the insurance company says, hey, this Zinsco electric box needs to be replaced, or we can't insure it. Okay. And the buyer gives the seller written notice that it needs to be replaced. Then the seller has a couple options. One, if seller makes the required repairs to satisfy the mortgage lender and or insurer, buyer will accept the property and agree to the release in paragraph 28 of this agreement. 2, if seller will not make the required repairs, or if seller fails to respond, okay, within the stated time frame, buyer will, within 5 days, notify seller of buyer's choice. So the buyer then, if the seller says, I'm not making that repair, or they just won't respond to the buyer then has to, A, make the repair at their expense, as long as they have permission to access the property, which will not be unreasonably withheld. Seller may require that buyer sign a pre-settlement session agreement, which is good practice, such as the PAR form for the pre-settlement possession addendum, which shall not in and of itself be considered unreasonable. Or the buyer can terminate this agreement by written notice to seller with all the deposit money going back to the buyer according to the terms of paragraph 26. Okay. Now, if the buyer then fails to respond within the time stated in paragraph 8G2, or fails to terminate this agreement by written notice to seller within that time frame, buyer will accept the property and make the required repairs and improvements at the buyer's expense and agrees to the release in paragraph 28 of this agreement. Okay. So there's a lot going on in those paragraphs there, but it pretty much, as well as it could, outlines the time frames and who has to do what and when.
So Kong, I've used this section actually. As a matter of fact, Erin, who's on here, Erin Olam, she probably doesn't even realize this because we wrote this offer last night. But we wrote an offer on a house that is going to have some issues from an insurance standpoint that we will make sure the insurance company is aware of. But we waived all of our inspections because we are trying to be as competitive as possible. Knowing that that insurance company is going to flag some things that we are then going to turn around and negotiate later.
Sure.
So I have used this as a negotiating opportunity. If you want to try and waive certain things because you know you can get them covered later.
Right. Yep. And again, it's up to the listing side too, to kind of know the contract and know that that could be coming up too, right?
I'd say the average listing, at least in our area, the average listing agent never pays attention to that.
I mean,
because they fight me on it every single time I pull that out of the pocket. So
I mean, if you have a Zinsco box, you should know that, right?
yes.
So, okay, so the last part of the mortgage contingency, if you notice in my notes, I wrote on the side there, continuation, okay? This box for FHA, VA, if applicable, is a continuation of the mortgage contingency because you see how it starts off with paragraph H, it's continuation. But it's set off by itself. Why is it boxed in, okay? Because they wanted to highlight this and set it apart from everything else, okay? Paragraph H, it is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of this contract, buyer will not be obligated to complete the purchase of the property described herein or to incur any penalty by forfeiture of deposit money unless buyer has been given, in accordance with HUD, FHA, or VA requirements, a written statement by the Federal Housing Commissioner, Veterans Administration, or a direct endorsement lender setting forth the appraised value of the property of not less than fill in. I know it says the purchase price as stated in this agreement after that, but please fill in a price because, you know, it's good practice to fill in any blanks, okay? Even if it's not applicable or zero, fill in a number so that we have it filled in. So what does this mean? Agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of this contract. So I wrote in my notes here the definition of notwithstanding, and it means in spite of. So if you reread that, it is expressly agreed that in spite of any other provision of the contract. So let's say even if you agreed that the buyer is to pay on an FHA VA deal, the difference between an appraisal value, okay? This kind of contradicts that and sets it off that they don't have to buy this property irregardless, right? It is expressly agreed that in spite of any other provisions of this contract, doesn't matter, they can still back out. Okay. So that's just something to think about. I mean, that to me, when I read this for the 10th time over and over, I was thinking, well, if an FHA buyer says, I'm willing to pay $15,000 above the gap difference on an appraisal, but then this little paragraph sets it off that they don't have to do it. Okay. Does anybody have any opinions on that or any questions or comments?
Yes, I do, Kong.
Yeah.
What if they did I listed a house and the buyers had a conventional loan. And then 2 weeks before our settlement date, they decided they were going VA. And they pushed the settlement date back. But they have nothing written in for the FHA VA. So do they still have to go through with the contract even though nothing is there if they didn't change that?
Well, if they switch from conventional to VA, then they're, first of all, you have to find out why. Okay, why are they doing it? And usually it's to say that, you know, they need less upfront money, but you have to find out the why. Why are they changing lenders or the type of loan? And if it's because of some kind of reason that, because maybe they lied on the application or something that they're in default, then maybe we can look at it and say that they're in default and the seller gets a deposit money. But again, if you wrote in, you have a mortgage contingency in that box with these terms, it's conventional with 20% down, your loan amount is 150 grand, and now you're not getting it, and the seller gets a documentation that says, well, wait a minute, this documentation of this approval states they're now going VA. So it's really then up to the seller to say, nah, I'm not going to agree to that. I'm going to terminate this deal and go to the next deal. Or the seller can work with the buyer, and then, you know, the list agent and the buyer agent have to work together to figure this all out and make these changes. Do you go back and make a change to this contract then? I don't like going back and making changes to the contract once it's executed. So my advice then would be to have a change in terms stating that line 175 of the agreement of sale is now changed to, you know, whatever the sales price is for VA FHA, and that the loan terms, loan amount, and loan type is changed in that change.
Well, we did do that. And we did say we need an explanation. Sometimes I think they put down conventional because they didn't, you know, some people don't like VAs or FHA, and then they did a switcheroo.
Right. Well, then that's being very, that's really not good. That would be in default and almost furnishing false information. So you go back to 8F.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, Brooks.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brooks.
Sorry, Kong Brooks left for an appointment.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
I thought I heard his voice.
Kong, this is Bob Lehman.
Oh, Bob, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, does this only apply to FHA, VA loans?
Yes.
Okay. So none of this counts against a conventional loan?
No, as a matter of fact, I'm not sure if you know, in ZIP, you have the ability to strike out a paragraph or strike out a word or strike out a sentence. If I'm doing a conventional deal, I just actually strike that whole.
Okay, that's what I do too.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, at the top, FHA/VA if applicable. So no for conventional.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Just remember that even though we have that box filled in on line 175, the lender is typically going to send a FHA VA mandatory clause form that's going to need to be signed by the seller after application's taken.
Yep.
So we're duplicating the information, so it is going to come to them too.
Yep. Now, what Tim states is absolutely true. Our contract in the state of PA has it in there. Some of these lenders, they're national lenders, and some of the contracts in other states don't have this in there. So that's why they include that. Just to be sure. There is a little warning there. And it talks about section 1010 of Title 18. So I wrote in my notes here a short blob about that HUD will prosecute false claims and statements. And here are some examples, okay? Fraudulent origination / underwriting, false statement on valuation. You know, if you try to assist the appraiser in any way, violation of HUD guidelines, providing Section 8 housing, not HUD standard. Okay, so just a little warning there for you if you try to commit anything fraudulent. Okay. Section I, paragraph I. This is the HUD's buyer acknowledgement. Okay. The first box, which should be check marked, is a HUD notice, get a home inspection. Okay, it's just advising their client to do a home inspection. Okay, so there's a pamphlet there, and I know we have it in PDF and the pamphlet downstairs in the mailboxes there, the paper box that you can give to a client. Okay, so if you're doing an FHA or VA deal, check mark that. Okay, that's your advice that you told your client to get a home inspection and the benefits of it. The last checkbox is about 203K financing. Buyer will apply for Section 203K financing. This contract is contingent upon mortgage approval. I've never done a 203K before. I know some people in the office has, but again, it has to be approved as well. This box will make it contingent on that approval. Okay. Then lastly, J, certification. Buyer and seller. This is for both the buyer and seller. So when they initial and sign the contract, they are certifying this, that the buyer and seller don't have any other agreements or side deals. Okay. And if there is a side deal or any other agreement, that it will be attached to this contract. Okay. Any questions? I know that was a lot there. Okay. Well, thank you for attending today. Next week, we will go into pages 5 and 6. We'll talk about those pages. And if you have any questions between now and then, please feel free to give us a call. Brooks, Tim, myself, Kathy, we're always here for you with any questions, because again, like I said, it's not always clear cut, but certainly we can help you decipher it and protect our client. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Kong.
Good job, Colin.
Thank you.
Thank
Colin.
you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.